It's Melissa Mortensen from polkadotchair.com, and I am going to show you today how to piece the Santa's hat quilt block that goes with my Santa's Hat Shop quilt pattern. I'm going to walk you through all the steps of creating the block. This block is traditionally pieced. There's instructions in the pattern to make a full quilt, and then I'm actually hosting a quilt along for this project right now, and as part of the quilt along, we're going to talk about how to turn the quilt block into a fun Christmas bench pillow, if you would prefer to do something like that instead. And part of the quilt along for people that participate and buy the pattern, you will get the free pattern for the Santa felt block to go with it as well. So I hope you will join me and have fun stitching this block. So let's just talk real quickly about piecing this block. Like I said, this block is traditionally pieced. I would consider it an intermediate or confident beginner block. If you're new to quilting, I would say go ahead and tackle it, because I'm going to walk you through the steps. You can go slow, and if you mess up, who cares? Don't show it to anyone. It's not a big deal. If you're really worried about it, start it with some fabric that you don't really care too much about, so that you don't feel like you're wasting anything. The one tip I will give you is to go ahead and make sure on your sewing machine that you know where the 1/4 inch mark is. So you may need to do a few test seams, measure it with your ruler. This block, the seams work the best when they are what's called a scant 1/4 inch seam. So it's just barely one tiny little stitching line less than 1/4 inch. But we'll talk about that more as we walk through the construction steps. Okay, there's a few things to keep in mind before you start sewing. So the first thing is you've probably noticed that this is a pretty sizable pattern. There's a lot of information in here, a lot of different options for you of different ways to sew your blocks and different blocks you can make. So you need to print out the pattern. With every pattern, I recommend that you take a minute and read through all the directions before you start. I feel like most of the things that people run into are usually questions that are answered a little bit later in the pattern. So here we've got our supplies, and then some information about foundation paper piecing, and then here. So this is very important. Please read before you begin. This is kind of what I want to call your attention to. So there's quite a few different ways to make these blocks, and there's quite a few blocks in the pattern. So first thing is figure out which blocks you're making. If you're making foundation paper piece blocks for the Santa hats or the party hats, and if you're doing traditionally pieced blocks for the Santa hat or the party hat, because you can make a party hat too. And then if you did want to go ahead and make the joy blocks, those are listed here as well. We are just going to cover traditionally piecing the Santa hat blocks in this video, and we'll talk about some of the other ways to create this quilt in future videos. But for today, just to kind of keep things simple, we're just going to talk about the traditional piecing. So in order to kind of give you guys lots of information and guide you through it, just know which one you're making, and then as you go along, make sure that you are paying attention to which part of the pattern you're on. The pattern's numbered, quite a few things in here. So we also included, before you get going, a coloring sheet if you would like to plan your layout a little bit first. It does include the version with the joy blocks, which we're not doing for this pattern sew along, but it is there if you want it, so you could kind of just make a note. But this kind of will give you an idea, so you can kind of plan where you want to lay your blocks out on your quilt. And then at the end of the pattern, we've got all of foundation paper piecing patterns for the hat block. Also, at the end of the pattern, you have a template. This is the template, if you're traditional piecing, that you're going to need to create your Santa hat blocks. And you do need to cut the fabric out of this template. There's a couple ways to do this. First thing, obviously, is just to cut the piece of paper out and cut your fabric from there. Second option is you can get template plastic. You can see it's pretty thick. I will link up which template plastic specifically I used, and I created a template this way. You can also use a standard I'm 90% sure this is a 60-degree ruler. It is called the Spiderweb ruler by Carla Alexander. I will also go ahead and link this one up. But if you use this one, what I recommend is kind of going in and seeing where the piece is, and then on your paper, on your ruler, mark where you want to start. So as you're cutting, like, you know where you're going. And this is just washi tape. It just peels off. So I like to use that. When I'm doing that, I use this to cut most of my pieces. So there you can kind of see how that works when it's lined up and you've cut it out. So that is a little bit of prep you need to do before you get sewing. Okay, once you have read the pattern, you're like familiar with where you are in the pattern and what you want to do, you're going to go ahead and cut out the pieces. The cutting directions for traditionally pieced Santa hat blocks are found on page 3. Just a note, I have listed out the cutting directions for each Santa hat block individually. This quilt features 30 Santa hat blocks. But if for some reason you wanted to make a pillow or a table runner or a smaller quilt, I went ahead and listed it out per block just to make it easier so that you don't have to divide everything by 30 if you're not making a whole quilt. So you will need to do each one of these 30 times if you're making all of the blocks for the quilt. And then the blank blocks on the quilt, that refers to the blocks on the quilt like this one that don't have any piecing. It's just novelty fabric or background fabric or whatever it is that you want to use. Another tip I have for you is as I cut, I go through and I decide which fabrics I want with which Santa hat. And I'm just doing a traditional red and green. As I cut them, I put them into stacks. Normally, if I was making a whole quilt, I would go ahead and probably cut like 10 of these at a time. And stack 10 of them together and work on sewing all 10 of them at the same time and do that 3 times because I feel like it's faster to do it that way than to go in and cut each one at a time. And then I think cutting all 30 at the same time is a little bit overwhelming too. So to keep my pieces together, I like to use these design boards. These are by Riley Blake Designs. You can get them a lot of places. If you don't want to purchase them, you can just use a piece of foam core that you've cut up. Put a little bit of fusible fleece on it. You could also, I've also used, people use cheap paper plates that they just stack on top of each other and reuse for every block project. So the big thing you want to do is, because there are quite a few like little pieces in this, is you want to just make sure you keep all your pieces together. See, I already lost some of mine. Keep all your pieces together, and this does a really good job for me of keeping it together. It's how I prefer to do it. So now you've got your pieces cut out, I'm going to show you how to piece one of the blocks. Okay, hopefully you've got your pattern next to you. On the printed pattern, now it may be different on the digital pattern because sometimes we have to consolidate pages when we print, but on the printed pattern, on page 15 is where it starts with the instructions for the traditionally pieced blocks. A couple things, for my Santa hat blocks, I like to go in and finger press a center seam in this before I get started, because you're going to need to match up centers, and I just think it's easier if you kind of like visually have an idea of where the center is before you get started. So we're going to start with our large pieces of green fabric, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to sew it, and then I will bring it back. Okay, so we're going to lay out one of our pieces here, and then we're going to line this up like this. That's how I have it. If you're not sure, if you're worried, oh, is that going to like cover enough and is that going to be big enough? One trick that you can always do is just go like this and rotate it. And then you can kind of like visually see, okay, when I get this all sewn together, is this going to cover all the way out here? And it will. That's why on the pattern it lists for you to do it like this. So you're going to layer this just like this, and then you're going to come in and you are going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along this edge of this piece. Okay, so I've sewn that edge. You can see a little bit better on the green side of the fabric, and then I'm just going to kind of finger press that out of the way. I will press it correctly, afterwards. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side of the Santa hat block, like so. And I'm going to stitch right here, just like that. Okay, so I have stitched both of those pieces, and then I went to my iron and I pressed the seam. For this one, I like to press the seam in towards the hat. And then you're going to need your cutting mat for the next part. So the first thing, the first step I like to do on this one to kind of help me get everything going the right direction is I trim the top and bottom pieces off of this. This is why you want to make sure you've pressed it so that everything is coming out straight. And then on your cutting mat, you're not going to trim anything off the red part. So you're just going to come in here, make sure this is straight. Okay, then I'm going to come in and trim that part. This is discarded. And then you're going to come and trim the top, same way. Okay, now you're going to go ahead and rotate this. Now that line that I talked to you that we kind of pressed in the middle of it, you can't see it super well here. If you want to, you could go ahead and use a pen and mark it, which actually I'm going to do so that you guys can see a little bit better. I'm going to use one of my Frixion pens and mark this for you. So I can see this fold line on here where the center is. So I'm going to mark it so you guys can understand this step. Okay, so we've got center here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the center here, and then I'm going to measure out each side. And it tells you on the pattern how wide you need this piece to be all together. So I'm going to measure out. So I've taken the width and I've divided it by 2. So I'm just going to measure out that much on this side. And then on this side. That, and discard. And then you should have a piece that is the size noted in the pattern, and this piece is. So we're ready to go on and move. You're just gonna put this aside, and we're ready to go on and move to piecing the pom-pom at the top. Okay, next we are going to go ahead and show you how to make the pom-pom part of the block. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see this a little bit better. We've got our white pom-pom piece, and then we've got 4 small squares. I'm going to show you how I like to mark my squares. You can use any sort of fabric pen, use a friction pen if you want. What I prefer to do is use a, I think it's called a Hera, H-E-R-A marking tool. I'll be sure to link it, and then I just come in with this side of it and give it a nice press, and hopefully you can see that it leaves a nice mark there so I can see where the diagonal center of that is. So I'm going to do that to all the pieces. Also, when you're working with pieces this small, sometimes people do like to hit it with a little bit of starch before they cut. It will just give your fabric a little more stability. It won't move around as much as you go. Okay. So I have those marked. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to place these. I'm going to start in opposite corners, and I'm going to stitch right, you can see that, stitch right along this line I marked on those 2 corners, and then I'm going to do it again with the other 2 pieces on the other 2 corners. Okay, when you're done, you'll have a piece that looks like this. I like to use this ruler for the next step because that has a nice kind of a shaded area where my 1/4 inch is, so I can easily see where my seam is. And what I'm going to do on all 4 corners is I'm just going to come in here and we'll lay this down so that the 1/4 inch mark is just on the other side of the stitching line. And I'm going to chop off all 4 corners of this piece. just like that. Then you're going to go over to your iron and you're going to press each one of these up. As you press, make sure you just go straight up, straight down. Don't move it around, don't wiggle it too much. You should still have the same size rectangle as when you started. If you need to trim it up a little bit, that's totally normal. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, I have all 4 of those pieces pressed. They're not going to lay down perfectly flat at this point. Don't worry about that too much. And then the next thing you're going to do is take your 2 rectangular green sections of fabric and stitch it to each side of this block. Okay, we are ready to assemble the block. It's very straightforward. So we've got your pom-pom piece here. We've got a piece that goes on top, and then I've gone ahead and skipped ahead a little bit. This is my rectangle, with the triangle in the middle, I guess that's how you say it. I did go ahead and stitch to the brim piece 2 rectangle pieces to that side, and then I went ahead and stitched the long piece to the bottom of this. So the way I like to do this is if you pin this in here, you'll notice since you pressed your seams inward on the hat, I guess, not the pom-pom. So the pom-pom's out, this is in. You can nest your seams in there really nicely. So I'll put a pin here and a pin here, and as I stitch, that will help line it up so that the pom-pom's in the center of the hat. Okay, and I've got my block stitched together. I'll go ahead and show you on the back because a lot of times people like to see which way I press my seam allowances. Normally you always press towards the darker fabric. However, on a block like this, I prefer to press whichever way the fabric wants to go. In this case, it did end up being towards the darker fabric, but like with this seam, I wouldn't want to press that up because it would it's not happy. The fabric is not happy going that direction. Just press it the way the fabric's happy. Another thing that might happen, since this is cut on the bias after you did like your, sideways kind of cutting thing, it may end up being a little bit larger than 10.5 inches wide. If that's the case, come to your cutting mat and just really quickly use your ruler and square up your sides. I would only do that if, like, on this side it was off by quite a bit. It's off by quite a bit on this side, so I'll go ahead and square that up. Don't worry too much about it being perfect because all these blocks are going to get sewn into a quilt anyway, and you won't notice it at that point. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy making this block. I hope you're having fun as part of the quilt along. I'm really excited about this, and I'm excited about the idea of doing more videos for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section. And like I said before, if you have any questions, well, you can obviously leave them in the comment section, but also take a minute and read the pattern. All of the measurements are in the pattern. All the steps are outlined. There's photos and illustrations and all kinds of things to help you out along the way.